Welcome to Movies That Matter, the podcast about recent films going above and beyond the call of box office returns to boldly explore a social issue affecting people's lives. I'm Nicole Finari.
And I'm Stacy Moore.
And what movie are we overanalyzing this week?
This week we're overanalyzing Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Alrighty. Directed by Quentin Tarantino, it's set in 1969 Los Angeles, where everything is changing as TV star Rick Dalton, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, and his longtime stunt double Cliff, played by Brad Pitt, make their way around an industry they hardly recognize anymore. I have literally no ability to predict this upcoming answer. Like, what did you think of this movie?
I haven't decided. So I am with you. I am with you on that.
Oh, I've decided. I decided I was bored.
Oh, you were bored.
It was too slow for me. Like, I just thought it was boring. There's a lot we're going to say in this podcast, but I actually just think the review from Slate from Dana Stevens, where she was basically like, this is a dude movie about dudes doing things that are far less interesting than they think it is. And I was like, yep. I got nothing to add to that assessment of this movie. Like, I couldn't have cared less about either of the main characters. Mm-hmm. I missed the, like, Samuel L. Jackson, later taken over by Christoph Waltz, like, snappy, charming character, who I later realized was probably the little girl, but then she wasn't in much of the movie, so she was, like, boring. Nobody talked much.
Sure, it was it wasn't as dialogue heavy as most of his stuff, right? Like, he tends to kind of pride himself on having, like, all of this, like, very quirky, long-winded either monologues or conversations, banter and whatnot. And it was very, in that respect, very quiet, and yet also quite loud. I was like, Nicole is going to appreciate that. The audio production on this movie was merciless.
Unbearable.
Relentless.
Yes, that is, like, in fact, the second note after feet. Yes, that's what it might be. So note number one is feet?
Feet? Why so many feet?
Apparently, I didn't realize this is a long thing with him that he had a foot fetish.
I didn't either.
But there are a lot of shots of feet.
Right. To the point where I questioned myself, my knowledge of men. Like, I was, of straight men, that is. Every time there was, like, a sexy shot of some woman's feet, Brad Pitt leering at a pair of women's feet, I would think, wait, are feet hot? Are feet hot? It's a straight men? And then I went, no, they're not. That's just Quentin Tarantino's foot fetish.
Well, but it wasn't even just that. There was, like, every time, like, Cliff and Rick would, like, pull up somewhere, the next shot would be of their feet, like, exiting the car.
Oh, interesting.
There was just a lot of shots of people's feet.
He's just really into feet.
It was weird, and I didn't understand it. But then, note number two was like, oh my god, everything in this movie made a sound.
Yes. Like an abrasive sound. There were, like, long sort of swaths of like maybe 15 minutes long of just really loud cans opening, things,
cigarettes, like, burning.
Yes, a radio kind of playing, like, really sort of obnoxiously between stations, car doors shutting, like, just
if
non-stop.
If someone made a movement in the film, there was an accompanying
You
noise.
heard it.
Yeah, and it was like, for things like, again, that's all post-production. Like, there's, for things that don't make noise. Like, It was a lot of noise.
And I was like, I couldn't decide if, I noticed that a lot of it happened during Cliff Booth's quiet scenes, like when he's not speaking.
Right.
We're just kind of following Cliff around.
Right.
And I didn't know if that was supposed to be some kind of indication that he's kind of, Cliff Booth is this very... the Brad Pitt character, he's the stunt man of of this sort of aging has-been actor played by Leonardo DiCaprio, Rick Dalton, right?
Right.
So Cliff Booth, it just kind of hangs around Rick Dalton. He kind of, he's slightly sponsored by Rick Dalton, right? To, like, be a handyman and drive him around and whatnot, but mostly just be his best friend.
Yeah.
And he's sort of...
We're at the 19th century. He would be the paid companion of the older lady.
Yes, yes, precisely. Right.
So, like, do some fetch and carrying, but just basically, like, give me someone who's my friend.
Right. I just need someone to hang out with.
Yeah.
And not be alone. So he seems to be this presented as a man out of time. He is completely physical. He is aggressive and violent and doesn't say much. So while Rick Dalton is this has-been actor who, much like the cowboy in the westerns, has aged out of his usefulness, Cliff Booth likewise has aged out of being useful as a stuntman. He does not fit into society. He's like just very, like, he doesn't fit into contemporary society. And that's sort of like pointed out when we find out that it's like presented to us verbally that Sharon Tate, the platonic ideal woman,
right,
prefers like petite artistic creative guys. Like we're told that with words by Steve McQueen. And it's like, just to say, like, Cliff Booth does not belong here. He doesn't belong in this world anymore. He belongs in the old world, not the new one. So I didn't know if the sound production was just to like drive home that he's almost like an animal. Like he's just very physical. And we see him doing parkour, like hopping up buildings.
Yeah, that part. So he does that, and there's another scene where he takes off from McDalton's house and he does like some stunt driving, which I was like, that was kind of neat. Like, I appreciate the fact that, like, hey, still a stunt man. Mm-hmm. He's got skills.
Right. He just needs that adrenaline rush. He needs to feel like he feels when he does stunts and does physical things, and he can't help but start fights with people, and he just doesn't fit into society. So I didn't know if he was like, he's almost like an animal that like can hear things that other people can't hear. And that's just how that's the universe he lives in. And then he's got this, was it a pit bull?
Oh, yes. Brandy, the pit bull.
Brandy?
Yeah.
Yeah, this pit bull who, like, is basically almost an embodiment of him. Like, also this very, like, okay, so bear with me, pit bull fans. Please do not send me hate mail because I just don't want to hear it. But, like, this pit bull is, like, also an aggressive animal that feels out of place in sort of polite society.
Right.
And so they're, like, great companions in that regard for each other. So I don't know if he was, like, being compared to the pit bull. Like, they're just these two, like, hunter animals that just don't belong. Yeah.
That's a very interesting point. I don't know what to think. I don't know.
I don't know if I like the movie. I keep going back and forth on it. I can't point out a plot. Like, what was the plot of the movie?
Okay, yeah. So my problem with the movie, there are a couple things. Like I said, the pacing was just unbearably slow. Like, there just not that much happens, and then all of a sudden a whole bunch of stuff happens at the end, and you're like, this was really slow.
Which I think is intentional. It's supposed to be like a Sergio Leone film.
Yeah.
Well, no, specifically a
right. Yeah. Fair enough. You're the Western expert. So the weaving in of the Sharon Tate plotline into them, it just didn't.
Curious.
Like it didn't add. It didn't really make any sense. I also I just was like, I felt like I just watched a really long episode of The Family Guy. Because there was a whole lot of somebody bringing something up, and it was like, cut to, like, and like, you know how the Family Guy is like, oh, chickens, and then there's like an image, and then there's like some riff on like Peter with a chicken or whatever, and I'm like,
and then a hard cut back.
I was like, there's like a lot of that in this movie, and I'm like, I don't know if Seth MacFarlane was involved. Someone you want to like emulate in your career. It didn't work for me. Having said that, my sort of favorite parts and the best parts of the movie to me were the sort of fake footage. Because
very impressive.
Yeah, and it really caught, from what I've seen of like TV in the 50s and that stuff, like it really mimicked, to me, like a Twilight Zone episode. Yeah, like how much like shot from underneath and like the lighting and the shadows. I'm like, oh man, this is what old TV looked like.
Yeah, it looked really, really good. And I loved the, I'm sorry, like I know there was a lot of flack about a couple of scenes using the sort of the impersonations of late Hollywood actors, but they were like I could not intellectualize that I was not watching Bruce Lee acting on film. I was like, that is Bruce Lee.
Bruce Lee was
McQueen.
good.
Like Steve McQueen was
I totally
frame.
disagree on the Steve McQueen. I thought Damian Lewis was like the worst cast of that, really.
Oh, that's true. Just his face. His
but
face
like,
looked like Steve McQueen's face.
My complaint was like, this is a person who's made his entire career out of like being the controlling cold English guy who doesn't get the girl. Sorry. Go back and look. He's been in a lot of like British
asterisk
serials like Damian Lewis, and I'm like, and then I was like, and then they give him Steve McQueen? Like, no.
I'm sure it was solely because of his facial features. Al
Pacino was also hideously miscast. I felt.
As Schwartz.
Yeah, I was like, no.
He's like this guy named Schwartz that insists on going by Schwartz, and like everyone who knows like well enough like calls him by Schwartz.
Yeah,
you didn't like him as that.
No,
I thought he was effective.
I thought he looked like he was in a costume piece. Like,
oh, okay. What about Michael Madsen?
Who was he?
I couldn't even like remember like what his character was. I just have this moment of recognition of his face.
Okay.
Like he could have been like a bellhop. I don't even remember.
I mean, for the random ones like that girl who played Michelle Phillips was uncanny. I was like, and Mama Cass. I was like, whoa, both of them look just, I was like, woo, that's close. So
that's a good place to segue. The Playboy Mansion.
Uh-huh.
I can't decide if this was like self-aware or not, but the Playboy Mansion is like presented as this utopian place where women can just feel safe and live their best lives, you know, and dance like no one's watching, and which is what Sharon Tate and Mama Cass and Michelle Phillips do at the Playboy Mansion. There's only a couple of Playboy bunnies in the background, and they're almost like modestly dressed. There is no indication that the Playboy Mansion was actually this hideous place where women were like quite unsafe, and where there's like, you know, there's records of like women like, you know, possibly dying from like abuse. But again, it's based on, if we line that up with how the movie ends. Yeah. Spoiler.
Oh, yeah. 'Cause like so we need
it's a fairy tale. It's once upon a time. It's
right.
Like it's not just verbiage.
Part of why we need to spoil this is like, I knew this whole story. I think I had recommended on a previous episode that I'd seen, that I'd listened to Karina Longworth's series on the Manson family.
I'm obsessed with that series.
And she was so good. But I'm like, I think like a whole lot of people who went to see this movie who are younger than Quentin Tarantino had no idea what was going on or like what happened. Yeah. The person I was sitting next to had no idea.
You're kidding.
Because they don't say Charlie Manson at any point in the movie. And you had to have known who Sharon Tate was. They say Charlie.
Oh, they don't say Charlie Manson.
They don't say Charles Manson.
Yes,
they say Charlie. You have to know Spawn Ranch. You have to know you basically have to already know Sharon Tate's story, or this movie doesn't make any, like, so, spoil it.
Yeah. Sharon Tate doesn't die, guys. The Manson family, like, doesn't kill anybody. At least not at Roman Polanski's mansion.
Right.
Essentially, there's this like slow, sinister, simmering buildup that I actually did think was effective. Like when Charles Manson, you know, kind of shows up at the house, as he did historically, saying, "Hey, where's so and so? I'm looking for so and so," and then he walks away. That was really well directed in the sense that there weren't any like actual sort of cliche horror movie devices used there, and yet my heart was pounding. I was terrified. I'm like, oh my god, like he's coming. He's stalking the place. So we meet the Manson family at their home on Spawn Ranch later, and it's played it's like somewhere between like a suspenseful Western shootout, right, but also part horror flick, right. So that's all building. And then, you know, there's like the big murder that we all know is happening. And it's very, very difficult and like, you know, uncomfortable. And you're like, here it comes. And the whole time I was thinking, what's he leading up to? What's he going to do? What trick is Quentin Tarantino going to pull? And the trick is that, like in any decent movie, in any, you know, classic Hollywood movie, in any decent Western, the good guy wins and the bad guy gets shot. And in this case, that plays out with Cliff Booth, the animal, the guy that does not belong in this society because he's too violent, is actually uses his quote unquote gifts. Now I'm using that word very in context here, to defeat the bad guys. And the Manson family, the 4 people, it was actually 4 in the movie, it's 3, come in to his house, to Rick Dalton's house, and Cliff Booth and Brandy the dog.
Oh yeah,
and
Brandy
Rick
was
Dalton.
hero.
Yeah, MVP. Brandy for MVP. Golden Boot Award. They just make short work of these quote unquote family members. And it is brutal.
Yeah.
It's brutal to watch. It's strange. It was very strange for me, and I was aware of it in the moment as a feminist. Pretty darn glad to see a man like annihilating these women. It was very similar to Quentin Tarantino's other sort of wish fulfillment historical fiction climaxes where Nazis are blown to, Hitler's head is blown off and annihilated. Slave owners are all shot. It was just a moment where like the bad guys lose. And it was almost like Quentin Tarantino was saying like, I can't fix the world. I can give you a happy ending. I can rewrite history for a moment. We get this wish fulfilled where like Nazis die and slave owners die and the Manson family dies and Sharon Tate gets to go have a party later and have friends over and drink wine. Because that's the way it should have happened, even if it didn't. Yeah.
No, I think that's good. And I think though, we can't, it was pretty clear as the conversation started to move in the landscape that there was no way we weren't going to talk about the misogyny of the film for this podcast.
Sure.
Yeah. And we'll get into that, but I think actually...
What else on the film side?
I think you covered,
it's very like, it's almost like, it seemed to be Quentin Tarantino's like clip book, his mood board of like how he came up with all the movies he did.
Yeah.
And it seems intentional. So he shows a clip from, there's a whole like sequence of Sharon Tate watching her own movie over and over all day. And it actually is not obnoxious. It's actually, to me, was quite charming. And I was surprised by how endearing that was. The way that, and that's completely due to Margot Robbie's performance.
Yeah.
She plays Sharon Tate. For someone who doesn't have a lot of dialogue, she plays Sharon Tate in such a sweet but also complex way. There was never a point where I was like, oh, look at this bimbo who just walks around being pretty. Like, she's objectified by the camera.
There was that point for me. There was that point.
Yeah. But she's a character that you don't want her to die at the end. Anyway, so she's watching this movie and we see a scene from her movie where she is performing martial arts against, opposite to training with Bruce Lee, performing opposite to an Asian woman who is also using these like kung fu performance moves, and you realize, oh, that's Beatrix Kiddo. Like that is where Beatrix Kiddo came from. Like, that's how we got Kill Bill. Yeah, and there were loads of scenes like that where you go, oh, I see. That's where Inglourious Bastards came from.
Yeah. It didn't have, I don't know. I guess what I would say is this, like, I don't know that I would have known this was a Tarantino movie if I didn't already know, like, just from watching how it was shot. Like, it didn't have a lot of his sort of, it was fine. Like, it was fine.
It's not his best work.
It wasn't his best work. But
I loved this, there's a beautiful shot of when Cliff Booth goes to Spawn Ranch and there's like the showdown or whatever. And he has to, there's a member of the Manson family named Tex is sort of, I guess, sent off to, confront Cliff Booth. And he's riding across the desert and then rides through town. And there's this amazing, like, tracking shot that must have happened on a drone or something. And it's glorious. Like, there's a few scenes that are really, it's really interesting to watch. Like, I loved looking at all the individual frames. But it was more, like you said, meditative. It wasn't like, there's a story here that I'm watching. I'm watching this story, and I want to know how the story ends. It was more just like, oh, look at that, and I'll look at that.
Yeah, I just, I don't have anything, I can't, it's not like I'm like, oh, the cinematography was terrible, the editing was terrible, but I don't have any, like, great things to say about it either. But I do want to shift into, the thing that sort of, like, centered this whole film for me, which is really interesting, because it's not something that I thought was a question. And in that way of like, you're like, oh yeah, well, we all saw the same movie, so we all think the same thing. And then I found out like, no.
I had that experience a lot, yeah.
I'll post this in the show notes. There was an article about like, what did we all make of the boat scene? So the reason that Cliff is a has-been, as it were, is that he's having a hard time getting work because, although he's never convicted as such, it is sort of well known by everybody that he killed his wife. And
dude killed his wife, y'all.
Yo, see, that's what's so funny. Like, I didn't think he killed her.
Oh, you didn't?
No.
Oh,
no. All right.
He killed her. He did it.
Make your case for why you think he killed her.
I think it's the only way the movie makes sense.
Okay.
He's supposed to be this violent man. And violent men kill their wives.
Right.
That's what they do. It's why he doesn't fit into the world. You know? He's an aggressive, violent guy. He doesn't mind killing people. And the only reason he refrains from killing or hurting anyone or having sex with an underage person, which is presented to him as an opportunity, is he just doesn't want to go to jail.
So my perspective on the movie was that we never see him pick a fight. We never see him have a problem with anger management. He is very calm all the time.
He's not angry.
Yeah, he's a good friend. He has this sort of mocks. There's a scene where he mocks Bruce Lee that, it does come across really problematic. I did not like that scene. And so he like gets in a fight with Bruce Lee, but you see him try to like knock him out in one punch. Like, he's not angry. He's not trying to prove something. He doesn't go overkill. So I'm like, everything we've seen about this guy is that he's a pretty decent dude. Like, I don't see that. Like, I never thought he was the killer. Like, I thought he was the good guy. It was the old-fashioned Western, like, he uses violence when he needs to, but was not inherently a violent person. So, like, my take on the movie was very, I guess, had I cared enough about Cliff, maybe that would have affected how I felt about the movie, but I was like, I didn't care, like, whether he killed his wife or not. Like, didn't really matter. But I agree with you, like, there is a strong case to be made that the saving of Sharon Tate doesn't make a lot of sense unless it's, like, his redemption.
Right.
But here's the problem that I have, which no one seems to notice and wasn't even in that article.
Lay it on me.
So, Sharon Tate is given almost no dialogue in this movie. She never talks. She is blonde. She is pretty. Her career is ascendant. And not only is she pretty, when she's, like, hugely pregnant, she's still really pretty and sprightly and cute. And I'm like, yo, if you've ever seen anybody, like, pregnant like that, they kind of do the pregnant waddle.
Yeah, she doesn't waddle.
She doesn't waddle. Like, God forbid she look anything less than, like, stunningly beautiful while pregnant. And, like, I'm not trying to insult pregnant women at all, but, like, brass tacks people, like, your ankles are swollen, you have hemorrhoids, like, your center of gravity is totally off. Like, it's not an easy time when you're in your third trimester of pregnancy.
You don't feel your cutest.
No, you don't.
Like, what actually bothered me more than anything surrounding Sharon Tate's presentation was Rick Dalton's wife.
That is 100% my point.
I feel like...
Go for it.
There must have been... The most generous reading is that she had scenes that were cut for time. She is not developed at all. She's just arm candy. She's just the new young Italian wife for Rick Dalton.
Oh,
and then,
sorry, yes.
And then she has a couple of scenes during the murder sequence where she steals the show. She is so funny and so engaging and so, like, just fun to watch her react to, like, everything going on and, like, being interrogated by the cops afterward. I was like, where was she all this time? This is a delightful character and a talented actress. Like, why didn't we get more of her? She was totally just pushed off to the side.
Right. Well, so you have Sharon Tate again, the ingenue, pretty and blonde, never talks, the perfect woman.
Perfect woman.
And yet, who are the other two older women in Cliff's life? The one shot we have of him on the boat, and sort of the reason everybody thinks that he killed his wife, is she's portrayed as a nagging, like, hostile shrew.
Yeah.
In her one and only scene.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
look, see how she deserved to die. She was so mean.
Yeah, and so when people are like, "Oh, it's misogynistic because they killed the Manson," I'm like, "No, the Manson girls deserved to die.
They deserved it."
But there is a line: who deserved to die? Who deserved to get saved? The wife, who was an older lady and like hostile or whatever, so therefore
deserves to die.
She's got to go.
Yeah, you can't have her in the world.
And then there's a scene, and literally the only person in the entire movie it appears to bother that he might have killed his wife is yet another older woman.
And a shrew.
So what I find particularly galling about how this woman is portrayed in the movie, again as a shrew, is that she's like really bossy and...
He's emasculating towards her husband, right?
Right. Which...
He should just shoot her, right? He should just shoot her on a boat.
No, but the thing is, she is the boss. In that production,
right.
She literally is the boss.
Yeah.
So it's like, she is the boss. She's like, you screwed this up. I told you not to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Get it, take care of it. You didn't take care of it, so now I have to.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm, hysterical, right? She's angry about it.
Yeah.
And the whole scene is played as if and all the guys are like, oh, Mom. She's so unreasonable. And I'm like, she is the boss. She gave you a direct order, which you violated. Right. And this whole scene is to portray her as the one who's in the wrong.
Yeah. And in Cliff Booth's defense, at the end of that whole memory sequence of that scene, he stops and goes, fair enough. He actually kind of sees her point.
Yeah.
She's like, oh yeah, no, that was dumb. They shouldn't hire me again.
Yeah. And it's so interesting to me. I'm like, how do you talk about the boat scene and fail to notice how that wife is portrayed versus all the loving shots of a almost completely silent Sharon Tate?
Mm-hmm.
And no, Quentin Tarantino, I don't think you meant to film it that way. I think you didn't notice that you were.
And I think that's why he was so defensive when he was asked about it at Cannes. Someone asked, a reporter just said, hey, what's up with that man? And I don't think it didn't seem like she was attacking him. She just wanted to give him a chance to discuss it, and he just got really defensive and was like, no, you're a jerk and I'm not going to talk about it.
Yeah.
And then Margot Robbie's credit, she was like, well, I'll talk about it. And gave her a real answer, which you can agree with it or not. She was basically like, oh, Sharon Tate was a simple person. She wasn't going to talk a lot, and she communicated in other ways. And okay, I'll consider that. But the point is she answered. She answered the reporter. Whereas, because she doesn't have anything that she's not overcompensating for anything. She's not ashamed of her performance. Whereas Quentin Tarantino doesn't have anything to say because I think you're right. I think it was unintentional.
Yeah, I think it was unintentional, but it was there nonetheless.
Mm-hmm.
And so
unself-aware.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. That's where people get caught off guard. And it happens to all of us. And I react defensively when someone was like, hey, that was kind of racist, Nicole. And I was like, what? No.
Oh, yeah, I guess
wait,
so.
was it?
No, me too.
You know what I mean? No one is asking anyone to be bias free. That doesn't need to be the bar. But I would hope that in the whole amount of time that from writing a script to filming it to to post-production, someone would have been like, cue my man, this is kind of misogynistic.
I think he's just at that status where no one's gonna say anything, no one's gonna question him. He's the the sacred holy genius, and they're not. Who's gonna do it? The AD, the key grip. Not Margot Robbie.
Yeah.
She's like, you're a genius. Yes, I'll do this.
Yeah, no, yeah.
She did her best. She did. She did not phone it in. She did not.
She did, and if that character has any depth, it's because she brought it,
Absolutely.
not because I think he did.
Absolutely.
And so there was there was a lot of discussion of his other movies and his track record and Kill Bill and Jackie Brown, and I'm like, I don't care. I think probably he is a decent guy. That's not the point. He screwed it up this time.
Sure. I'll take it in the context of his whole body of work.
Right.
I'm not writing him off as a director. You were just noticing this time it fell through the cracks.
Yeah. And then on the flip side, like I said, I just I couldn't care. So this was supposed to be this meditation, art imitates life of the character who's become a has-been. Where is his career going? What is left for him to contribute? Blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I could literally care less about what happens to Rick Dalton or his career or Cliff. Like, I had no feeling for either of those guys. Did you?
I did. And I think it is because of my I don't background, for lack of a better phrase, my background in Westerns.
Okay.
Actually, this is appropriate because Quentin Tarantino is who got me into Westerns.
Huh.
It was Kill Bill. It was watching Kill Bill around the same time that I took a film course in genre film, and we did a unit on Westerns. And I'd always just thought of them as like, oh, this is just over-masculine, like shootouts and whatnot.
Right. And
was introduced to all of these themes that are present and are consistently there and played with, and,
subverted,
Yeah. So that plays in a great deal here where Rick Dalton is essentially a stand-in for Peter Fonda. And I hope it's Peter Fonda, not Henry Fonda. Which one's the older one? It's Peter Fonda, right?
It's Henry.
Henry Fonda. He's a stand-in for Henry Fonda, who had the 1950s career as the white hat in all the big Westerns, disappeared for a while, and came back in a big way as the villain in Once Upon a Time in the West. So it's very clear that we're supposed to make this connection to Henry Fonda. I wonder, well, I am sure that this is also sort of an exploration of what is Hollywood's responsibility for the violence currently present in American society. You had an entire generation, and it is sort of like pummeled into us. This is not a subtle point that's made. I think it's actually verbalized at one point by one of the Manson family that these guys like Rick Dalton and during certain scenes, Cliff Booth, where they made a living by carrying out representations of murder, like over and over and over again. And it was in your house on the television, and it was on the big screen, and the hero killed people. That's what the good guy was. It's the guy who could stay alive the longest by killing everybody else. And like, why is that glorified? Like, why does that make him a hero? Whereas like Cliff Booth, who actually is violent, like is actually a loser,
right? And
not valued, and lives behind a drive-in theater, which is also a vestige of an old Hollywood. Yeah. This was new Hollywood meeting old Hollywood. That's what the Manson murders demarcated, was the end of old Hollywood and the beginning of new Hollywood, and like the two, like that violent friction between the two,
right? To which I respond, then just go see Singing in the Rain.
That's much nicer.
I think all that was in there. I think that's a really good point. I just think there were too many scenes of like them being drunk and complaining about, and having Rick Dalton, Leonardo DiCaprio, like complaining about stuff, and too few scenes of anything else. Like he was, there was some very sort of loving, well done shots of like, old Hollywood and like signs turning on and all of that stuff to sort of evoke this like this time that was rapidly ending, right? Like in 1969 being the summer of love, but also being the summer, the summer of the Manson family, like all those things like intersecting. But I'm like, the Manson family were just kind of stuck in there, and they didn't really seem to have any real purpose. And then the shifting back and forth between Sharon Tate, with the movie coming out and just starting her career, and Rick Dalton, like it didn't weave together in any kind of pleasing, cohesive way.
I agree with that. It was definitely not cohesive. It really is tacked on to the end with Sharon Tate inviting Rick Dalton into her home.
Right.
Is supposed to be, I feel like it's supposed to signify, new Hollywood sort of accepting old Hollywood as like a legacy, as like, I guess.
Respect to your elders, yeah.
Sure, like the them that come before you. I loved the tacked on thing at the end, the post-credit scene.
Oh, did you? I hated it.
Oh, I loved it. Okay, so at the end, Rick Dalton, you get to see Rick Dalton in these old ads that he used to do at the end of his shows, where he is essentially promoting Lucky Strike cigarettes,
right?
Called Red Apple cigarettes, and it's like just take after take of him being like, "Yeah, it goes down smooth, and this is the best cigarette," and da da da, and it's kind of like driving home like, there were ways that Hollywood actors actually did kill people. You know, like they have an effect. Like,
right.
Hollywood has an effect if you promote violence, if you promote something, a carcinogenic product.
Yeah.
Like, and, they're responsible for that. And maybe it is good that it's done and over. Old Hollywood, that is.
Yeah. Maybe.
Or maybe not. Maybe we should respect our elders. I do not know. We should not stab them to death. We should not do that.
And you know me, I hate the 70s. Like, I didn't like what was to come, even though, like, the 70s are considered this, like, seminal moment in cinema. I'm like, I'm just not a big fan of
Oh, forget it. I never watch any movies from the 70s.
I know.
No, I can't separate them from that culture that came of just, like, misogyny and, like, abuse.
Yeah, exactly. It's like,
No,
as a woman, you're like, oh, you know what? I don't actually want to see Easy Rider.
No, I don't.
Like,
I don't care about Dennis Hopper and Peter Fonda.
No.
Yeah.
There you go.
I don't care about, I don't romanticize the Playboy Mansion.
Yeah.
It was not a happy place. It was terrible.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, I mean, I think that really is it. It's like, once again, this sort of, you nailed it. Like, he can't help but look back on that time from I'm a dude, and this was a great time to be a dude, and you could go to the Playboy Mansion, and you could be lit, like, loaded all day, and still, like, have a career. You know what I mean? Like, wasn't this like, amazing time and free love, and there were women, and
isn't it sad that it's gone?
Yeah, and 16-year-old girls who are willing to give you a BJ in your car, like,
and the ones that weren't willing. Mm-hmm. Take them too.
Yeah. And it's like, and it's one of those things that's like, yeah, white dude, real easy for you to look back and, like, reminisce about this lost time. Mm-hmm. Basically, so I don't curse poo all over the legacy of Bruce Lee.
Well, that guy was a douchebag. Bruce Lee was the worst. He was so obnoxious.
Okay.
He really was like that. But he gets his scene with Sharon Tate that kind of, like, brings him back around as, like, a good guy, like, passing the torch to a woman. That's kind of nice. That is nice. But,
like I said, like, all this, like, make America great again, for who?
I totally respect that read of it. And I have seen it elsewhere. I think there is a potential generous reading of that being the beginning point, and that these guys who are,
relics.
Right. Learn to operate in this new world in the capacity in which they are welcomed. So, like, they're not on top anymore. They're not the lead. They have these new roles, and they do embrace those new roles and their capacity to, to operate in this new world where Sharon Tate is on top.
Okay.
I think that's possible. I think that's a potential reading. I would like to be generous enough to give it.
Okay.
I totally respect the other one, too. The evidence is there for that as well.
Yeah, and I don't think either one of us has to be right. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm, like, however you choose, the lens you choose to see this movie through is up to you. This is one of those, like, let's not have the boring argument about authorial intent versus, like, audience interpretation, right? It doesn't matter what,
it's irrelevant.
Yeah. So then bringing that all together on a scale of 1 to 10, what would you give Once Upon a Time in Hollywood?
I'll say, I feel like I give everything a 2 or a 3. Just because nothing is ever, Brokeback Mountain.
Yeah.
or Black Panther. I'll give it a 4 just because people talk about it.
Okay.
And so maybe something will come of it.
Okay. I mean, it's for me, it's like, it's very hard not to weight him against himself.
Mm.
And I haven't seen most of his recent movies. I thought Inglourious Basterds was a stupid idea. Like, I maintain, like, writing these sort of alternate histories is dumb. Like, who cares? Like, this is not an interesting thing to think about or to film. I'm kind of inclined to give this a 2 because, however this podcast may have sounded, I'm actually a huge Quentin Tarantino fan. I'm diehard fan of Pulp Fiction and Reservoir Dogs. I only saw Jackie Brown once, and I really liked it, but I never saw it again. And loved Kill Bill.
Oh, God. Kill Bill Volumes 1 and 2.
It's just amazing.
Love them.
So it's not like it's not, I didn't come into this thinking that I wasn't going to like it. So yeah, I'm going to give it a 2. I'm like, see all his other stuff. Like, this is not, like, give this one a miss. All right, recommendation for the week.
I would like to recommend, since I feel like I recommended Karina Longworth's podcast before, I'm not going to do that again. Although I love it, love it, love it.
Yes.
I will recommend an Australian film that came out a couple years ago called That's Not Me. It's about an Australian actress. She's a twin, and her twin is also an actress and hits it big. And through the protagonist's own sort of like character flaws, character failings, does not. And she just essentially goes around like Rick Dalton, like getting rejected everywhere. And it is just another examination, but from a woman's perspective of being an out-of-work actor that no one appreciates.
Oh, that sounds really cute.
It was charming.
I love it.
So That's Not Me. You can probably watch it on iTunes or something.
I don't know if this is a recommendation yet, but if you want to like reach out to me anywhere, I'm making my way with friends and with Christopher, fellow co-host, through the new Veronica Mars.
Oh, how is it?
So far, so good.
Oh, nice.
There's some issues.
Ooh.
Some very stereotypical characters, so we'll see how it all plays out. I'm trying to avoid all the buzz, so I know there's going to be some controversy come the end, but I'm here for Kristen Bell.
I wish her the best.
Always and everywhere. So we hope you enjoyed this episode. We're still having some technical glitches. Sorry if you guys missed the posting of this episode. On Twitter, at Movies Matter Pod, but most things have sort of worked themselves out. Our website is still moviesthatmatterpodcast.com. You can reach out to us on Facebook if you want to talk to Stacy.
I'm at Stacy Erin Moore on Twitter. And Instagram.
Awesome. And remember, movies matter.
So do you.
We'll see you next time.